Welcome to Insight Today. This is John and Josh Rosenstern, and we are very pleased you're able to tune in. Once again, we got camp meeting coming up just in the next few days, starting Wednesday, but we want to remind you, for those that are coming to the camp meeting early, we have a pre-camp seminar teachings that will take place beginning Monday at 1 p.m. We'll be doing a session Wednesday from 9 till noon, dealing with current events, but more particularly Bible prophecy and end-time prophecies. I think you'll find it very interesting. And we're going to be dealing a lot with Israel and how it interacts in the Word of God, especially in the end-time events. So join us for that if you can, but join us for the whole camp. It'll be a blessing. These next couple of days are going to be very special to me. Today is my wife's birthday, and I want to wish her a very happy birthday. I will not give you her age, but she is a little older than me, although she doesn't look it. Also, tomorrow is Josh's birthday. So you will be 28. I don't mind telling the people that.
I will be 28 years old. I mean, I'm getting so
trying
old.
to grow some whiskers, but having no luck, I see.
Well, as my grandfather, your dad, who has now passed away, said at one time, he admired the third eyebrow I was growing above my lip. But yeah, tomorrow's my birthday.
Yes,
I'll be 28, and I know that that's still a kid, and like I joke with a lot of people. I just got out of diapers, and now I'm sharing them with my son Noah. So it's how it goes. But yes, we're excited to just have the day, and when you have kids, as you know, of course, the birthdays matter less, it seems, of your own sense, because it's still their day regardless.
Exactly.
But we thank the Lord for 28 years, and
yes.
I pray that I have as many until the Lord comes back. And if he came back before my 29th birthday, I would not be upset whatsoever.
I don't think so.
Because I've got eternity in front of me. Well, look,
Amen.
A lot to talk about today, as
Yes.
we've been discussing all week. There is so much that is going on in the world. But, when we look at the topic of ISIS and this group, and again, I'll reiterate something that I said before. I had someone to ask me, well, when you hear the term ISIS and you hear the term or the group Al-Qaeda, is there a difference between the two? And you answered the question very succinctly by saying that really they're like two heads of the same creature, so to speak. And but here's the question that I have in my mind, and I think you're going to address this using and leveraging someone who would know a little bit about why someone would move and defect, so to speak. Why are folks joining this group, ISIS? I've heard a lot of reasoning from our politicians saying that, well, number one, global warming is a cause because of the effect that global warming and climate change is having on the environment and the particular topography and geography that, famines, and they have to turn to this group for that reason. It's creating unrest. I've heard others give other reasons and whatever the case, but why are especially young men leaving their families, leaving their home, and moving to become a part of this group, this terrorist group called ISIS? In other words, why would people want to become criminals? Why are people moving to become terrorists?
The why questions are the most difficult for us to answer. So some of this is going to be, as I said, from an individual who defected. We talked about that yesterday. You're bringing it up now. But there are a lot of why questions. Like, for example, why aren't the neighboring Islamic countries making an opportunity for these refugees to find a place to stay, at least until the situation in Syria, Iraq is resolved and they could go back home? That would be the thought process. But many are joining ISIS, and the reasonings are not quite so much for religious zealotry. It's not because they want to join and go kill Assad. It's not because they want to join to fulfill a jihadist's ideal of we're going to conquer for the sake of Islam. Some of them are actually joining because of the impoverished scenario that they've been placed in because of the war. And I bring this up for a reason. I'm not trying to say that this individual has the entire answer, but he is giving an answer from his perspective living in these areas. So this Islamic Caliphate, which by the way is not recognized, the ISIS Caliphate, al-Baghdadi, is not recognized by a majority of Muslim scholars in the world. They claim in order to have a caliphate, meaning an Islamic leadership that rules the people, that can rightfully issue fatwas and rulings, has to be through consensus. Now, when we understand that idea of consensus, we have to understand in the Islamic community, they first look to the Quran, then they look to the Hadiths, which is the life of Muhammad, the sayings and traditions of Muhammad, and then they come to a consensus. The majority of the clerics and leaders come to a consensus as to who should lead or who would be considered a leader in Islam. 120 scholars wrote ISIS not long ago telling them, you are not a caliphate, you don't represent the majority. You know, Josh, I was looking at statistics early this morning when I got up. Some claim there are only 40,000 of these ISIS fighters in Iraq and Syria. This is not, as far as an army is concerned, a large contingent of people. There are said to be 11 million people displaced from Syria as a result of this uprising over the last 5 years. Now, much of the damage was caused initially by Assad. There's no question he has been accredited to murdering more, upwards of 200,000, than ISIS, although ISIS seems to be doing a very fair job of killing and murdering and so forth. But this individual talks about the desperation for many of these to survive. He goes by the pseudonym of Abu Khalid. Now, whether that's his name or not, we don't know, but he was interviewed, and he says a large number of people are joining ISIS because they need money. He goes on to say after joining the militants, people are paid in U.S. dollars instead of Syrian liras, which apparently are worth virtually nothing right now. He also says ISIS members receive additional incentives to fight for the group. So you got two classes of people, those that are just told to join and those that are part of the fight. If you join the fight, you get more money. Mm-hmm. But many of these become sympathizers. This is what happened in Nazi Germany. Many joined the Nazi Party but weren't necessarily pro-fighting. I had the pleasure of meeting a gentleman, he's probably deceased now many years, who fought in the German military. He was a young teenager. His family, he said, was opposed to the war. Mm-hmm. But they all joined in sympathy with the Nazis because by not joining, you were ridiculed, you were separated, you were ostracized. So you just did it to do it. But because of his age, he was, in essence, like he said, drafted. He had no choice but to go to fight for the military. And he knowingly, consciously fought a war that he did not agree with in his mind. Now, I'm not saying he represents all the German military. That was by far the case. But this individual, living in the U.S., was a client of mine for a number of years. This is going back 25 years ago. Was very honest, and we appreciated sharing discussion. Anyway, he says that after financial benefits are not just limited to organizational fighters, but this Khalid fellow said that members of ISIS, ranging from construction workers, doctors, and others, receive similar compensation. So it is an entitlement plan and a compensation plan that uniformly compensates all people reasonably equally to be part of ISIS. Now, there are others that claim they have similar experiences. This Yassin al-Jasmin, he's a Syrian refugee from near ISIS de facto capital of Raqqa, shared his experience. He said there is no work. You have to join them in order to live. And he went on to say so many local people have joined them, they were pushed into the Daesh by hunger. So he's claiming the reason they joined was because of the war and the great impoverished situation they're suffering there. They have access to food now, they have free medical care, and they have desirable housing. And how does ISIS get their money? According to these individuals, ISIS gets its money through sources of income from their oil, sale of looted antiquities, taxation, and kidnapping ransoms. So taxation has to do with money that's called the jizya. They take money from those that support the Islamic cause, especially the non-Muslims, and they use their monies. I brought this up for a reason because a concern of mine was this. A number of these talked about those that had become part of the ISIS fighting campaign. And again, if it's all just for money, where is the moral foundation of the hearts of these people? You know, I know in desperation people will do some pretty ill things, but some of these people have been said to turn on their own people, their own villagers that would not join ISIS and find themselves committing acts of, sadly, inhumanity against them. So you wonder where the heart of an individual is. They're willing to die, in some cases, for the cause of Allah, but they're not willing to die to protect their loved ones and family or neighbors,
well,
so to speak.
that raises a question, because what you're talking about now is on the minds of so many people around the world. Why are people doing these things? In other words, what would drive a person to act in a way that these terrorists are acting? I mean, to murder people in cold blood. And of course, we're not just talking about what happened in Paris.
No, look what happened today.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But you look at yes, and we're going to discuss that in just a moment, but even what's already happened. I mean, you talk about what the ISIS members have done to Christians. I mean, it's just the most atrocious things that you could ever think to do to a human being of all ages, of all genders. And it's just, what would drive a person? So, we know that the evil in the heart of a human being is one word: sin. The heart of man is desperately wicked. It is wicked and sinful. And it doesn't matter who you are, where you were born, how much money you have, don't have, whatever it is. The problem and plight of the human heart, period, is sin.
But if you have a religious ideology
Right.
that grants you license and
But according
gives
to what you just
reward,
read,
no, I'm just saying, for those that are participating.
right? But according to that, in some cases, it could be said and construed that folks that are joining ISIS are actually not just doing it for the sake of religious fervor or for the spreading of that brand of Islam or whatever term you want to put. They're doing it out of just, they have no choice, dire needs.
Well, these two testimonies are claiming that.
Well, that's what I'm saying, though.
But here's the thing, though. This is has been the argument or discussion by many in the West dealing with this issue. You have a predominantly Islamic Middle East. It is. You got 10% of Syria was Christian, 90% was Muslim. But the Christians had some liberty under Assad, but they didn't have the full freedoms that, for example, they would have in a country like the U.S. But here's my point. They're joining ISIS. Maybe it's not for religious reasons they're joining ISIS, but what ISIS is doing is for religious reasons.
There you go.
So they are sympathizing in that I'm going to protect myself more than I'm going to be protecting my neighbors because I'm desperate, so therefore I'm willing to betray them to be part of this organization.
Right.
Now, if this is the mindset...
What's wrong is wrong, too.
Here's my thought, though, and I didn't write the professor's name down from one of the universities, but his thought was this. He said, if we see this type of development, picture this, although ISIS itself may be small, like we saw in Paris, there wasn't a lot of people involved in the attacks.
Unfortunately, it didn't take a lot of people.
And likewise, what we see in Mali today, which is, of course, this hotel that was taken and hostages were taken, they went room to room asking people to quote a Quranic verse. I think it was the Shahada, which is the initial prayer to confess you're a Muslim. And if they didn't know it, they killed them. So, again, there were 140 that were staying at the hotel, 30 of them were employees. And they represented different types. But this is a hotel that has a lot of emissaries that travel and come to the country there in Africa. Now, I think there were some things done. 80 of the hostages were freed. The French were involved in the siege that took some of these hostages out. I'll deal with that, like I said, maybe in a moment more. It's still coming out of the news, let's put it that way. But here's my point. This professor made an interesting point. He said this. If the financial issues are so delicate because of the war-torn areas, and these people are so willing so quickly to join ISIS, although their fervor is not necessarily for religious, but the religious has them captive because they now become part of the cause. So anywhere there's poverty, anywhere there's difficulty, anywhere there is said to be difficulty, will people join? In other words, will this become the new mantra? We don't have as much as the world. And doesn't this play into the idea of, income inequality? So let's try to compensate. But isn't that another strategy that in the past Islam has used? The idea of the jizya, you pay for protection. Because if you don't give us the money, we will either kill you or subjugate you or kill your family. So you see how this thing can become a huge creature.
Well, when we look at our candidates running for president right now for the United States of America, we see the discussion, you brought it up, income inequality, but really what we're seeing already happening in our nation and other nations around the world, but America in particular, is redistribution. In other words, those who are looked at as they have, or at least more than the average person has, it should be taken from them and redistributed for the good of the others. That's a very socialist, ultimately communist mindset. The only difference is when in communism compared to socialism, with communism, the government owns it from the get-go, and they decide who gets what. And either way, but let me ask you this, though. Some of the wealthiest people in the world it's the leadership in these Arab countries, especially Saudi Arabia. And these folks, they've got so much money, what they do with it sometimes looks absolutely foolish. But, you've got the majority of people in Saudi Arabia.
Well, let's give an example of that.
Well, yeah, that's a good idea.
Talal has a Rolls Royce that is studded with diamonds.
Right.
The whole car has diamond studs all over it.
Right.
When it was in the England, he flew it back to Saudi Arabia to refuel it. That was a story that was in one of the newspapers.
He wanted their gas to be used instead of the...
Now think of this. The hyper extreme of some of the wealthy and how they display it, yet within their country, you don't have capitalism.
Well, where's the redistribution?
You don't have free trade. You don't have... No, everything is redistributed from the poor to the rich.
Yes, you're right.
Here's the challenge. Can an Islamic country that's ruled by Sharia or Islamic dictatorship or a dictator period truly supply the opportunity that a country like the United States can supply to a workforce?
No.
Now, we have problems here, and I'm not addressing those things. We do have problems, but comparatively, we have minor problems to the rest of the world.
A lot of our problems in this country, Dad, are because we've been adopting the ways of the dictators and the oligarchies. We're shifting away from
their troubles and exporting.
Well, we're causing our own problems because we're leaving what has worked and we're addressing these other things that don't work. But here's the thing. The heart of man will tend towards exactly what we're saying. But the point is this. If it's strictly a financial issue, or we can say that dollar signs and decimal points are at the heart of the issue, then the problem could in theory be solved relatively quickly if there was a little bit of help or redistribution of funds. So the question would be, well, in that case, should America be taking in refugees or just sending more money over there? The point is, when you address it from this, I'm back and say it like this. If you look at this problem from any other aspect as it being a truly spiritual and religious issue, you find holes in every argument. The fact is, it's a heart issue, it's a religious issue. Right? That means the answer is not political or financial.
That's why some believe the Middle East has lagged in terms of civility and in prosperity. Outside of gold, which was really, I should say the black gold, oil, they would not have been successful at all in the world. There would have been no hope for the Middle East because they never entered into the trade system. They never entered into the world economy, so to speak. And even to this day, they still don't. You don't see the freedoms and liberties there for innovation and ideas to be developed and expanded. Really. And that's unfortunate because the people suffer.
Well, they're very capable. I mean, when you look at some of these countries, like when you look at Qatar or Qatar, they've got some of the most amazing United Arab Emirates. I mean, these countries have the most amazing architecture, buildings,
but those are
technology.
Slightly more moderate comparatively than the Saudi Arabians.
I'm looking at the whole area as a whole. But the problem is, like you said, when you look at the bulk, now those are concentrated cities in certain countries. It's obvious that the resources, the technology, the intelligence, the capabilities are present, but
they've also invited many of the world to come in. Yeah. There is some freedoms in trades. There is some relationships there that these other countries don't have.
Well, let's
move on a couple things. Israel constantly suffers what I call active terrorism. Now, maybe on a scale that we're seeing like in Mali or in Paris, it's not as significant. But when you look at the number of citizens in comparison, the numbers are equally or even greater as far as what Israel faces in attacks.
Well, look, let's put it this way. The U.S., we had 9/11. Paris, we have what just took place the other day. But in Israel, it's virtually 24/7. It's all the time.
Yeah.
So when you look at it from that perspective, it kind of makes your mind start